This might be the biggest dinosaur fossil I've ever built. Also, the only one. And as I unpacked everything, I quickly realized that I have made a very serious commitment. Alright, before we get to the dinosaur, we need a place to put it. The base comes first. We need to make sure it's nice and solid and not really care about how it looks. And this is how it all started, so let's put it here as a reminder that we should never, ever mess with nature in any way, especially for profit. This is going to be a rather heavy set, so we need a couple of strong support beams to keep this upright, and hopefully these do the trick. Here we have a very cool printed fossil piece, so let's make sure that we hide it and never look at it again. The stand is solid, but just leaving it bare would look weird, so let's add some terrain around it, some rocks and little patches of foliage, just enough to make it feel like this T-Rex was actually dug up from the jungle. Inside the ribcage, there's a tiny green frog sitting at a steering wheel, which, yeah, probably not how dinosaurs worked, but I respect the commitment to whatever story is happening in there. Moving on to the spine and ribs, basically the structural integrity of the T-Rex. Without these, it would just be a pile of bones on the floor, which, to be fair, is kind of how we found him in the first place. Now, this part is pretty cool and satisfying. It's a massive ratchet joint for the neck, and it's doing some serious heavy lifting. Once the head is attached, this thing is totally locked in place. No flopping, no sagging, just a solid, menacing T-Rex stance. It's time to add some more little bones to the build. They're kind of like the backup singers of this thing. On their own, they don't stand out, but put them together, and suddenly the whole thing feels complete. As much fun as it can be to add tiny bones to a skeleton, we do need to have a framework for the rest of the build. Everything clips in pretty easily, and you can start to see how everything is going to line up. Still doesn't look like a dinosaur yet, but we're getting there. Okay, these little bones around the neck are apparently called cervical ribs. I had to Google that. They clip in pretty easily, but now I have to make sure that they're all lined up. I wasn't expecting to be this concerned about dinosaur neck accuracy today, but well, here we are. Once you know they're supposed to be here, you can't just throw them on randomly and call it a day. Our spine still needs more attention to detail, so we'll add a few more bones along with a couple of support pegs, because we're going to put this on the pillar and trust in the wonder of math and engineering. You know, it's interesting how building something like this makes you think about the real thing. You start piecing it together, following the instructions, and suddenly you're looking at the skeletal structure of a creature that ruled the planet. Every section has a purpose, a connection, a shape that makes sense when it all comes together. And that's what makes building something like this so cool. You're reconstructing history one element at a time. With each piece, this T-Rex is really coming together, literally. I'm just snapping them into place and hoping I don't mix up millions of years of evolution. How about we put together some dinosaur legs with Book 2? This comes together in two main sections. The first part is pretty straightforward, stacking up bones and adding some shaping. But then we have some clever techniques to reinforce the structure. Connecting the second piece is rather satisfying, as we need to make sure that this is going to be strong enough to hold up the entire structure. But it does have a strong connector that's going to lock this whole thing into place on the stand. It's sturdy, but I won't fully trust it until we get the whole thing assembled. Next, I had to lock that foot into place with this rod and then add some decorative elements to make it look nice. And here's the extra claw on the back, probably not for decoration, maybe for balance, maybe for kicking things really hard. Either way, I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of it, but it does look rather cool. Now for the other leg, and at this point it's feeling pretty routine, similar steps as before, slightly different pose. The techniques are still fun though, and once this is done, the T-Rex is finally going to stand on its own. Well, with a little help, of course. And now the real claws, because if that little back claw was a warning, these are the full-on, you really should have run claws. And if we learned anything from Jurassic Park, it's that when the big claws come out, it's already too late. They do give it a bit more stability though, which is nice. Now it's time for the ribs. They start small as we start off and they get larger as we move on. And the whole process is pretty smooth in theory until I step back and realize I might have just built the T-Rex equivalent of a crooked bookshelf. I'm hoping no paleontologists are watching this, and if you are, I truly apologize. Time to build the T-Rex's most intimidating feature, its absolutely useless tiny arms. These come together in just a few quick pieces, which honestly feels accurate. I mean, for something that lived its whole life stomping and biting, these arms were not exactly a high priority. And as we finish snapping them into place, we can see that this is majestic, powerful, definitely not the reason this thing ruled the prehistoric world, but hey, at least it tried. Wrapping up book 2 with some final touches on the top of the leg and just smoothing things out and locking everything into place. Honestly, everything is coming together beautifully. Well, most things. Some parts are definitely coming up a little short. Kicking off book 3, and we're on to the tail, because what's a T-Rex without an absolutely massive tail to balance it out? Each section will feel very familiar to the rest of the build. Nothing too crazy going on here, but it's still rather nice. And as we connect it to the end of the skeleton, these pins will hold it in place very securely. I found a little repetition with these other segments of the tail, but they did have enough variety for them to stand out on their own. And once again, they connect rather securely to the end of the tail. It was at this point I started to wonder just how scientifically accurate these different segments are. Like, if I were to look at a dinosaur fossil, would I recognize this after building the Lego set? But I'm not a paleontologist, and I probably never will be. I'm also starting to wonder if Lego just wanted to make sure that this thing takes up as much space as possible, but either way, it's coming together, and I am definitely running out of table. Now onto the skull, easily the most important part of this whole thing, but it's not like anybody's watching me build this or anything. This mechanism right here is going to keep the T-Rex's head stable. It's basically a reinforced gear piece that locks into place at set angles, and there's no tightening needed. It just kind of clicks and sets right in. Without this very important piece, the head would sag over time, and let's be honest, the T-Rex with a drooping skull wouldn't be nearly as intimidating, although it would be pretty funny. Now I had to put on this narrow part at the top of the skull, and out of this entire build, this was the only thing that I struggled with. Kind of just broke it as I was putting it on and fumbled a bit, but it's okay. It's okay, everything ended up being alright. And, you know, at the end of the day, that's all that matters. Next, I had to put together the other part of the skull with some pretty cool pieces, including this ball bearing-like piece here that moves in various ways. And I clicked everything together to finally finish this bottom part of the skull, which actually looks pretty cool. Time to give this guy some teeth because, you know, he kind of needs those and they snap in pretty easily, which is nice, but also concerning because if this thing ever comes to life, I just willingly armed it. And now the jaw. It's got a proper bite, it's got just enough resistance to feel satisfying, but not so much that it feels like I'm fighting it. And honestly, if I had this as a kid, I'd be making it eat everything on my desk, and I'm kind of tempted to do that now. Alright, moment of truth, let's see if this neck joint I've been bragging about can do its job and turn this into an actual T-Rex. And sure enough, this is a very proud moment. This wouldn't be a Jurassic Park set without a couple of minifigures. I don't see Jeff Goldblum though, and I'm not mad, just disappointed. Let's see if this plaque makes up for it, and I think it does. You know, it's not a sticker, so it saved me from crying. And of course we need a mini dig site to, you know, pay homage to how this all started with a mini fossil and dreams. Speaking of dreams, I'd like to thank my Patreon members for helping to keep my dreams afloat for the past couple of years so I can build cool things like this. I have many more on the way. This Jurassic Park set was just the beginning, so thanks for tuning in. and I will catch you in the next one.